When people talk about the great actors of the 1970s, names like Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, and Jack Nicholson usually dominate the conversation. But does Dustin Hoffman deserve to be mentioned at the very top of that list? Looking back at Hoffman's career, especially across the late 60s and all through the 70s and into the early 80s, it's an incredible run of performances. Starting from The Graduate and Midnight Cowboy, right through Straw Dogs, Papillon, Lenny, All the President's Men, Marathon Man, Kramer versus Kramer, Tootsie. He built a case as one of the defining actors of his generation. And Lenny is really a fine example of why that question deserves to be asked. In this film, Hoffman completely disappears into the role of Lenny Bruce. And even coming into it without knowing a great deal about the real Lenny Bruce, I found myself believing in the performance. This film follows the life and career of Lenny Bruce, who was a controversial comedian of the 50s and 60s. It starts off with his early days where he's performing more traditional nightclub comedy before he evolved into one of the most provocative performers in America. The film explores Lenny's relationship with his wife, Honey, a stripper who became his wife and closest companion as his career developed. And as Lenny becomes more confident on stage, his comedy started to move away from conventional jokes and really towards observations about society, racism, religion, politics, sexuality, hypocrisy, real social issues. And those performances became increasingly controversial, and he found himself targeted by authorities who accused him of obscenity, which was a big deal around that time in the 50s and even into the mid-60s. What begins as a comedian trying to challenge audiences slowly becomes a battle about freedom of expression. And as the pressure builds, Lenny's personal life starts to unravel. His marriage suffers, his drug use increases, and his performances become increasingly confrontational. They also become like rants about his situation, and he loses some audience for that as well. So the film really charts the rise and fall of a performer who may have been expressing ideas that society would eventually become more comfortable with in the not too distant future. But Lenny Bruce really arrived just before people were ready to hear them. I had seen this film before. I can't remember when. I think I just saw it because back in the day it would have been, again, one of those films in the 90s at some point that I would have watched because of Dustin Hoffman's reputation and the reputation of this film. But I just remember it being a good film, and that's it. It didn't stick with me. And about Lenny Bruce himself, I haven't really seen any other material about him. I've just always known about, I guess, his story and his place in the culture and what he basically, very, very basically, what he stood for. I knew that he was a comedian who pushed boundaries and that he got in trouble for that. And I knew that he overdosed. And that's really about it. Sometimes I even thought, after I watched this, I thought maybe sometimes that lack of knowledge about the subject can actually help with biographical films. Not so much in knowing, it's probably a disadvantage in knowing the story, but it's an advantage when you're not constantly comparing the actor with the real person. Instead, you're really just judging whether the performance works. Because I've watched biographical films before, and right from the get-go, I just have not believed that the actor's portrayal is working, and then I just can't get that out of my head, and I'm not concentrating on the film. it rarely works for me that it's seamless. I think Joaquin Phoenix did a really good job as Johnny Cash in Walk the Line. For me, the best of all time possibly is Val Kilmer as Jim Morrison in the Doors film. Um, there was a lot at stake for me with that one because I really got into the Doors just as that movie was coming out, and they had to get the look of and sound of Morrison just right, otherwise the whole thing falls over. And Val Kilmer nailed it to an eerie degree. But anyway, yeah, just thought I'd make that point. All right, Dustin Hoffman. Does he have a case as the defining actor of the 70s? I think he does. There's no definitive answer to this, but I just do think it is worth digging into this a bit more. The main films coming up to Lenny, The Graduate in 1967, one of those films that along with Bonnie and Clyde, The Wild Bunch, those kind of films represents the changing of the guard. The subject matter is very edgy and controversial. And yeah, you watch that film now and you wonder, how did that get made in 1967? You compare it with the other films that came out that year. Rinse and repeat for Midnight Cowboy in 1969, but even more so. Even more controversial. Again, Hoffman's there at the vanguard. Little Big Man in 1970. That's a film I'd like to watch again. I read the novel. Another interesting film and story. Straw Dogs with Peckinpah in 71. Again, Hoffman putting himself in a controversial film, very violent film, about a man dealing with a home invasion. Papillon in 1973 with Steve McQueen, another true story, allegedly, about the famous French criminal who escapes from prison. Then he makes Lenny, and then he goes on to make All the President's Men in 1976 about Watergate, just a masterpiece. Marathon Man the same year. He puts Marathon Man and All the President's Men out in the same year. Again, a film I'd like to watch again, but it has a huge reputation. Straight Time in 1978. I really loved that movie when I saw it a long time ago. I'm going to circle back to that one as well. He's playing a jailbird in that one, convincingly. Kramer versus Kramer. Incredible performance in that as the father devastated by the breakdown of his family. So that's his 70s. That's a rough, quick look at his 70s. And then he went on to make Tootsie and Rain Man, among other things, in the 80s. So what a run, really, from The Graduate to Rain Man. That is an incredible 20-year run. But look at that 70s and compare that to De Niro, Pacino, Nicholson. I think there's a case to be made that it's just as strong, if not stronger, than those three legends. Anyway, it's something worthy to think about, but I think Hoffman's body of work does deserve to be part of that discussion. And there's a lot of different roles in there. And he amazes me, the range that he has, because he's trapped in a body, a bit like Pacino maybe, that you would think would hamper the kind of roles that he could play. But he manages to be, he doesn't manage to be that intimidating figure that Pacino can muster. But in Straight Time, he's convincing as an ex-con. All the President's Men as a journo, as a comic in this one, with McQueen as a criminal. Midnight Cowboy, the Ratso Rizzo character. Anyway, I think he's got fantastic range and charisma. The amazing thing about Lenny is how many different versions of the character he captures. Lenny Bruce, as portrayed in the film anyway, has a lot of edges to him. He can be funny, He can be very angry, also vulnerable, childlike, intelligent, very self-destructive, and completely exhausted. And Hoffman just rolls with it. Uh, it does have that documentary realism feel to it, and that's all down to him. If he doesn't get this right, then again, like watching those other movies that we've all seen where the actor portraying the legend doesn't quite pull it off, the whole thing falls over. I did forget at times that I was watching Hoffman, and that's saying something when you're so distinctive looking as Hoffman. Um, that's a sleight of hand. That's a real actor at work. Bob Fosse directed this. I haven't seen too many of his films. I have seen All That Jazz that came out in '79 with Roy Scheider, and I have seen Star 80 about Dorothy Stratton, that tragic story, but a long time ago. I've never seen Cabaret. I can't believe that. I will change that. I haven't seen that. And he made another film called Sweet Charity in 1969. I don't think I've seen that either. Um, Most people think of Bob Fosse for his musicals, and that's understandable because he made Cabaret, which was a big deal and got a lot of Oscar attention, and All That Jazz as well was a. I remember watching that and thinking at the time, I saw that in the '80s at some point early, and I thought, should I be watching this? There was some interesting things in that one. Um, so yeah, most people know him for that angle, but Lenny really shows another side of him. Uh, this isn't a glamorous show business story. It's it's more a story about someone who's consumed by their own talent and their own need to be heard and understood. I thought Bob Fosse's direction in this is more observational. Um, he does do some interesting he does do some interesting things with moving backwards and forwards in time right from the get go. Even if you don't know the story, you would get the feeling that the characters are talking about someone who's now deceased, way before their time. You can just tell that from their reactions long before you find out what happens. Anyway, the film doesn't celebrate Lenny, I think, as much as it could have. It's more a study of him and just laying it out there for us to consume. Um, the black and white cinematography is again one of the smartest choices in the film. I seem to have seen this a lot lately. I don't know what it is. Just the films that I've been watching, the filmmakers have been choosing to shoot in black and white for stylistic reasons. It just it rarely fails, and it does give it more of that realism feel, which is odd when we don't see the world in black and white. But maybe it's because we feel like we're watching a piece of history then, like old newsreels that were in black and white, even though this is taking place in the 50s and 60s when color was around, and most things were being made in color. So yeah, it doesn't feel like a traditional Hollywood biopic. It's not cinematic, is what I'm trying to say, I think. But that lack of color, I think, really suits the story because there's a sense of distance and a feeling that we're looking back at someone whose life's already become part of a much bigger and cultural conversation. I don't know why, but it also reminded me slightly of Raging Bull. Just the look and feel of the film. I mean, in that film, obviously, style does help create a feeling of memory and tragedy, different kinds of tragedy. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know why that leaped into my head. Lenny Bruce, an interesting thing about the film is that I didn't really find his comedy routines themselves that compelling. And I don't know whether that was because Bob Fosse chose to present his routines in that way, or whether the comedy just doesn't resonate with me. Um, I didn't find it laugh out loud at all. His style in this film anyway. Uh, the ideas behind them though were fascinating, and I more related to the commentary on social issues, and I found that really really interesting actually when he was talking about racism and religion, hypocrisy, social rules, authority. It was like he was sort of doing a Seinfeld thing, but in a much more controversial way. Um, and the comedy really becomes a delivery system for a much larger message that people got. And he wasn't just trying to make them laugh, although he did. And he was trying to challenge them, and his routines became a whole scene. And again, going back to Jim Morrison, you see that in the Doors film. Knowing about him, people were watching him to see, is he going to explode tonight? Is he going to get arrested again? Is something incredible going to happen here apart from just the show itself? So it's like the performer becomes larger than the performance. One of the biggest questions the film raises, of course, is whether Lenny Bruce was just simply offensive, trying to offend to become, notorious, or whether he was ahead of his time. Looking back now, many of the subjects he was discussing do feel much more acceptable, and I think just from watching a lot of movies from a few years later and really being interested in that time in history, because it was just before I arrived on this planet, it seems like there was a really quick adaptation of the culture to what he was talking about. He passed away in 1966. I feel like by the late 60s even, maybe helped on by the horrors of the Vietnam War and the counterculture and I don't know, everything that happened, the moon landings. It seemed as though history sped up there for a while, and the culture quickly got used to the sort of things that Lenny Bruce was espousing, and then moved on again. Whereas in the early 60s, the things that he was saying were controversial and were considered wild. Didn't take long for that just to become by the by. So makes me think that the 60s were just an incredible decade, and you often hear that, and I wasn't, contrary to popular opinion, I wasn't around then. But what a decade of change. Incredible. The movies tell a story, don't they? You can even look at films as late as 65 and 66 and compare those with films from 67, 68, 69. Feels like 20 years has gone past in terms of what they were willing to talk about and depict in 1967 as compared to 1966 and 65. So the conversations that Lenny Bruce was having on stage in the 50s and 60s were really dangerous ideas to authority and just to people in general. So I think the tragedy of Lenny Bruce is that I do think he had important things to say, but he was just saying them before society was ready, and he wasn't willing to wait either. He had to say them then and there in his way. Valerie Perrine plays Honey Bruce, and I couldn't remember seeing her really. So maybe something vaguely familiar about her, but I couldn't tell you why. I did look her up. She was in the Superman films, oddly enough, at the end of the decade, and I haven't seen them for a long time, the 80s probably. She was in Slaughterhouse-5 as well. That's a film I haven't seen since about then as well. Anyway, that was probably a help as well, because I thought her performance was terrific as Honey Bruce, and the fact that I didn't know her and she wasn't an established actor in my mind or someone I know made the film seem even more like a doco, as though she was the real Honey Bruce to me. And the role could have easily just been a tacked on wife of the famous person, but she brings real complexity, and she's amazing at the start. I can see why Lenny fell for her. She is very captivating. The scenes are incredible when she's there in the diner and she catches Lenny's eye, and they're just looking at each other, and she's getting a bit hot under the collar as well. And yeah, really earthy, brilliant performance. I love performances like that. And she captures the difficulty, I think, of loving someone who's brilliant, mercurial, I think, is a good term for Lenny Bruce, but super frustrating and obnoxious and hard to deal with and really up and down, destructive. And she had her own battles as well, and that's depicted in the film as well. She probably wasn't easy to live with either, so it's amazing their relationship probably lasted as long as it did. But anyway, her relationship with Lenny gives the film much of its emotional weight, and I think the sparks between Valerie Perrine and Hoffman are there for all of us to see. The courtroom scenes, especially near the end of the film, I found to be some of the most powerful moments. And Hoffman does his thing there, where his earnestness and his emotional empathy really hits you right in the gut, and he always gets me. Kramer versus Kramer, he got me there at a young age, and again when I've seen it not too long ago. Just the way he tilts his head and looks at you, he really gets inside of you. And perfect for Lenny Bruce, because the way he's depicted in this film anyway is that he's just pleading for someone to understand what he's trying to say, to cut through all the noise and the legalities and the red tape, and just get to the human themes that he's trying to get out there. It didn't seem to me... Well, I guess what stood out to me in these scenes is that Lenny doesn't seem like someone who's just trying to escape punishment. He was desperate for people to listen to what he's trying to say. And he dispenses with all the tricks of his trade and just tries to say flat out to the judge, and it doesn't go well. And I found it heartbreaking to watch this person who believes he's got this important message, and he's struggling to communicate it in a way that society will accept, but he just missed the boat for me by a few years. And yeah, I've said it throughout this pod. I think the changing times is what fascinates me about this film. Society, moving from the 50s into the 60s, but definitely in the mid-60s, society is really beginning to challenge those old ideas about authority and censorship and sexuality, politics, and the youth. The youth are really getting their time, aren't they? Because Vietnam again sped all of that up. It got the youth, it got the youth on their feet, and in the streets, on the university campuses, and film and movie. Movies really got on the back of that and realized that that's where it was at then, and that they needed to start making films for the youth, or the younger segment of society. And Lenny Bruce to me in this film feels like someone who's right on the edge of that cultural change and leading it, and represents the future. But then he just got there too soon and left too soon. Is it a date film? No, there's too many serious social issues. Well, yes and no. It is a serious film, even though it's about a comedian. And it was, I think, my understanding is it was like a broadly released film at the time, and was meant for mainstream audiences, but it is pretty serious. It is the kind of film, though, that would lead to some really cool conversations about the times and censorship, politics, society. I guess it depends on your date, doesn't it? If your date's pretty intelligent and is up for a good chat about that, then yeah, maybe it will work. But uh, it's not what leaps into my head as a normal date film. But yeah, maybe. It's definitely not a hangover film. It's quite sad in parts. It'll bring you down. It's emotionally heavy, and you got to really engage with it. Otherwise, it'll just, yeah, it won't help. It won't help. I'm not even sure it's a buddy film, really. It's more reflective, I think, than entertaining. Although it is a good watch, but yeah, it's probably more a watch alone because of the social issues. You can really dig down and appreciate Hoffman's performance and what Bob Fosse's doing, and just think about the story of Lenny Bruce and the questions that the film raises. So the film is really top notch. It worked for me because it wasn't just a film about a comedian. They could have gone in that direction. It's really looking about society's reaction to someone who challenged the norm, and yeah, you can watch it for lots of different reasons as a historical document about the changing culture of America, the history of free speech. He knocked a you know he he really got rid of some of those barriers, or moved them at least. You can watch it for the story of Lenny Bruce, but you can also watch it and see Bob Fosse's direction and above all else, Dustin Hoffman's extraordinary performance. It's amazing to me that, of the films that came out in 1974, that he wasn't in the running for the Oscar, along with Jack Nicholson in Chinatown. I think this is the year that Art Carney got it for Harry and Tonto, a film I haven't seen for a long time. And it's one of those films. It's one of those years that's always talked about as to a missed opportunity for a younger actor like Nicholson or Hoffman to get the Oscar. I think you could, throw Pacino in there for Godfather 2. Geez, what a stacked year it was. I don't sort of get too much into these things, so I don't know if Hoffman got nominated, but he should have. Hopefully he did. So yeah, I didn't necessarily find all of the comedy routines hilarious, but a great watch. Just watching Hoffman work with the audience as Lenny Bruce was incredible. Like, I appreciated what he did. I've got the utmost respect for comedians. I think it's the hardest job in the world, trying to make strangers laugh. It's hard enough trying to make your mates laugh. Yeah, but anyway, I found the ideas behind the routines fascinating. And yeah, again, maybe I do feel like this is Dustin Hoffman's raging bull moment, where a performance where the actor completely owns the character and transforms. So look, yeah, I found it to be a fascinating portrait of a performer who really challenged society and paid the price. It is, I think, one of the great performances of the 70s that isn't talked about much. I do think the film adds another piece of evidence to the argument that Dustin Hoffman is one of the defining actors of that decade. I think he already is, but is he the defining actor of that decade? That's something that maybe needs to be brought up more often these days. Definitely not a film about whether Lenny Bruce was funny. It's really more about whether society was ready for people who put the mirror up and forced it to question itself. That's what I got out of it anyway. So a great watch. So glad I circled back to this one and saw it. All right, that's Lenny from 1974. Check it out if you can. It's really worth the watch. Thanks as always for listening. See you next time.